The true goal of studying and practicing technique is to have it all become automatic. At that point, you could just breathe and sing. At that point, you could just breathe and sing. Once it's automatic. Some feel that technique and singing with feeling are somewhat at odds with each other. But when applied correctly, nothing is further from the truth. Translated from the German nichts machen ist schwer, it means nothing, to do nothing is very difficult. This is not just a singing concept or a bel canto vocal training concept. This has been a tenet of every type of training for literally thousands of years. It comes from, you read it in books about Taoism and Zen, and also any newer books on sports training or voice training. To do nothing and achieve everything is kind of a Zen type of concept, but it has to do more with how the brain works. In reality, that's just a way of perceiving it when you talk about woo-woo concepts like Zen, which are very helpful sometimes. It's prominent in all sports training. The concept is described in sports books like The Inner Game of Tennis, as well as psychological books such as The Zone. Bruce Lee used to talk about getting into the right mental space before fighting, where he wasn't thinking, but he could just be free to react. He wasn't thinking technique. He would just flow like water. He would say that if his opponent expanded, he would contract and vice versa. So when you're at that level, competing in sports, it's so instinctive. You're like a cheetah that's capturing its prey. Cheetah isn't thinking about technique, right? But a lot of these things that we do, whether it's ice skating or singing, these aren't things that you're naturally, instinctively know how to do, at least at the level where we would need to do it to compete professionally, whether it's in the Olympics ice skater or singing on stage 40 songs a night. One of the things that Bruce Lee used to say was the best technique is no technique, and that did not mean that you shouldn't have technique. It means you have gone through all the work, so at that point it's automatic, and that's when you get to that level. And when you get to that level, it's a very liberating feeling, and it lowers a lot of the stress about going up on stage and saying, "Hey, I wonder if my voice is going to be there." You get to a certain point where yes, you have better nights than others, but you know it's going to be there. Even studies of the brain show how instantaneous reaction is way faster and more effective in any physical task than intellectually thinking about it to make sure you do it right. And talk about things like muscle memory. You first do need to use the teacher/learner intellectual part of the brain. Think about it, practice it, internalize it in order to develop the right habits. But then you need to let go and let the doer part of the brain take over. And these aren't technical tips, but this basically what it comes down to. And that's, as a performer of anything, this is kind of how you need to perceive it. Because after its job is done, the thinking part, the analyzing part, the coaching part of your brain that studies training, it's done its job and will just get in the way. It's like as if the coach of the Wizards tried to jump on the court and grab the ball from Michael Jordan in the middle of a pass. The coach is essential to his success, but that would not be the time or the place to get involved. And he would just get in the way. Now, after the game and in between plays, he can go over plays with the team, but during the game, the coach has to stay off the court. The Inner Game of Tennis talks to this point. So what seems like a paradox actually makes perfect sense. So when you're on stage singing, you're probably not going to be thinking technique. You record your performance, then you listen back later and say, "Ooh, I was flat on that note. I cracked on that note. That didn't flow the way I wanted." And then you take it back and workshop it. So for the next show, you do this. And I still do this after doing probably a couple of thousands of shows, at least over 1,000 shows, singing professionally for money. I don't record every show. I just don't have the time, but I do record periodically, or I just think, make a mental note a lot of times and say, wait a minute, that song didn't feel as good. That new song still needs some work on it. And I will workshop every week certain things, whatever the things that I thought were weak, or new songs, or things that I want to use to stretch my abilities. So here's some quotes from Zen in the Art of Archery by Herigo, who writes about the years spent in Japan studying to master the art of archery. In his training, he struggles with the dilemma, this very same dilemma of letting loose the arrow without deciding or intending to let it go. It must simply happen of its own accord, the master tells him. He learns ambition, conscious intention, even thinking itself is what gets in the way. This is exactly what it means by nicht zu machen ist schwer, or to do nothing is very difficult. And it is in no way specific only to singing, but essential to mastering any and all arts and skills. You cannot be a master of anything without mastering this. Here's a quote from that book. Man is a thinking reed, but his great works are done when he is not calculating and thinking. Childlikeness has to be restored with long years of training in the art of self-forgetfulness. When this is attained, man thinks, yet he does not think. He thinks like the showers coming down from the sky. He thinks like the waves rolling on the ocean. He thinks like the stars illuminating the nightly heavens. He thinks like the green foliage shooting forth in the relaxing spring breeze. Indeed, he is the showers, the ocean, the stars, the foliage. Or put more succinctly, if you've ever seen Caddyshack, when Chevy Chase says, "Be the ball." It's the same concept. And sometimes you hear that when coaches tell you, be the ball, be the note, whatever. Don't sing the note, be the note, whatever. These are just concepts that help you perceive these things better. But the thing is, you have to remember, to get to this point takes a hell of a lot of training to get your muscle memory, get your automatic, so that you could sing, 30, 40 songs in a row, and your body automatically takes the breath. Your body automatically sings the right vowels. You automatically have the feel of it, and by the end of the night, you're not pushing or slamming or batting your voice around because you have instincts that are not helpful. Because there are natural instincts when you're struggling with something to push on it, to yell, to push, which will tear down your voice by the end of the night and affects your ability to sing professionally 2, 3, 4, 5 nights in a row. And over time may deteriorate your voice overall. Here's another quote from that book. Perfection in the art of swordsmanship is reached according to Takuan, if I'm pronouncing that right, when the heart is troubled by no more thought of I and you, of the opponent and his sword, of one's own swords, or how to wield it. No more thought, even of life and death. All is emptiness. Your own self, the flashing sword, and the arms that wield it. Even the thought of emptiness is no longer there. So what is true of archery and swordsmanship also applies to all the other arts. Thus, master in ink painting is only attained when the hand, exercising perfect control over technique, executes what hovers before the mind's eye at the same moment when the mind begins to form it, without there being a hair's breadth between those. Painting then becomes spontaneous calligraphy. Here again, the painter's instruction might be, spend 10 years observing bamboos. Become a bamboo yourself, then forget everything and paint. The sword master is as unself-conscious as the beginner. The nonchalance, and this is where it comes down to, here's the dichotomy that people have a little bit of trouble. It's like, wait a minute, if I'm studying technique, I can't be that free, and vice versa. Well, of course. So the nonchalance, which he forfeited at the beginning of his instruction, he wins back again at the end as an indestructible characteristic. Read this as many times as you need to until it sinks in, and until you really get it. There is no paradox or conflict between learning and handling technique and singing freely. One is merely a path to the other. So the point is, you use that technique to get to the point where you can be free again. And take it from me, as someone who's, mastered would be the word, but got to the point in several skills, singing, playing guitar, where you can shut everything off. And what comes out sometimes surprises you. It's better than anything you've ever done. Sometimes you're on stage and you're just playing, and you just kind of let everything go, and it almost feels like it's coming from some other place, but it really is coming from you. You've been playing for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So there's a lot of internalized memory of good musicality, good technique, players that you've played with for years. That just comes out naturally. Don't get in the way. So at first, you need the technique, because without it, you're going to be, you'd have all sorts of trouble. But once you have it to a certain level, you start freeing up, and you see it's important to see what then goes wrong. So once you're maybe an intermediate singer, breathing, you practiced, you sound good, then you say, well, I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to just sing freely, sing with emotion, not think technique at all, and see what remains. And usually at first, things will go by the wayside, and you'll find out what those things are. And then you work on those things to the point where that breathing, that once you start getting into a song, you started pushing and shouting in your throat, you work on that. And then you get to the point where you could be upside down standing on your head with, doing backflips or whatever, and you'll still have a good breath, because it's automatic. It's automatic. Just like, when you were a child, you had to learn how to walk. And at first you struggled, but then at this point, you're not gonna forget how to walk, right? You're never worried about that. And as a trained singer that's been singing a long time, you're not gonna forget. Your body's not gonna forget how to breathe properly. And if sometimes you have a little slip up, what caused that and how to fix it. So that's by the next gig, you've cleaned it up. So I think that's really important point. So do nothing, but do a lot of work before you get there.